Tattoo needles can be confusing when you're a beginner, and even if you already know everything, it's easy to sometimes forget what all the numbers mean, the tapers, gauge, diameter, all the different terms used. So let me explain what everything means and in a way that is easy for you to remember. First, let's look at the way the information is displayed on the cartridges. Every box or cartridge will have a 4-piece code that tells you what needle type is inside. Now, different brands will put these in different orders, and I'll show you that in a sec, but the 4 elements are: 1, the diameter, which is also known as the gauge. This is how thick the individual sharps are on that needle bar. So a thicker sharp allows for more ink flow. So it's the individual needles that make up your tattoo needle. So I'm going to refer to them as sharps to make it easy to understand. So let's talk about the needle count and why that is important. This is how many individual sharps are on the needle bar. So more individual needles equals more space covered on the skin. Now next is the configuration. So this is how the sharps are aligned on that needle bar. So this will determine if the needle is better for lining, shading or packing ink. That's like your round shaders, your Magnum shaders, round liners and everything else. Lastly, it's taper. So this is how steep the angle of the needle's point is. The steeper the angle, the more precisely ink can be placed. So you've got 3 elements there that combine to create different types of needles. So just to give you a quick example, when you're choosing your liner needles, you want to keep your line weight or your thickness in mind. If you want a heavy line weight, a thick line, you'll pick a larger needle count. You'd also want to bear in mind the diameter, because you'll potentially get a thicker line with less needles if you have a large diameter. Now the benefit of this will often depend on how powerful your machine is and how much force is required to get the needles into the skin. So let's just have a quick recap. So we've got the diameter, the needle count, the configuration and the taper. So let me show you a few examples of how these should show up on your cartridges. Here we've got a Vitar cartridge from J. Conley, and you can see here they've got 12, 05, CM and L. So the 12 is the diameter, normally that is at the start of the code. We've got 05, so that's the needle count, so 5 needles. We've got CM, which is for a curved Magnum, and then we've got an L, which is the taper, which is a long taper. Now some of them will put a letter, as in L, ST, extra long, super long, there's lots of different codes that people will use, but in this case we've got L for long taper. Now if we look at the next one, what we can see here, this is a Killer Ink cartridge. I'm sure you'll be using these at some stage. So here we've got 12 for the diameter again. Then we've got M1. Now this is confusing, but this is actually just a standard Magnum, and they've just put the code as M1 rather than a curved Magnum, which is I believe M2. And then we've got /25, and that is actually the needle count. So there's 25 needles on this Magnum. So as you can see, they've kind of swapped it around, done it in a different order. So it does get very confusing, guys, if you're using different brands. So make sure you know what needles you're buying so that you're not confused about what needle you're going to be using when it comes to actually doing your tattoos. Okay, so let's have a look at another one. This is a Quadron needle. Are they the best needles? Guys, let me know in the comments. But on this one, they've done things a little bit differently. So we can see here we're starting off with 3.5. Now this actually stands for 0.35, which is a 12 gauge needle. So it gets confusing, guys, as you can tell, because obviously 3.5 is not 0.35 and it's not using the gauge either, so you can kind of figure that one out yourself. We've then got 13, so this is the needle count. We've then got SEM, which actually stands for Soft Edge Magnum. This is actually the same as a curved Magnum, but as I say, different brands do things differently. So we've got one brand calling it a curved mag, we've got another brand calling it a soft edge mag. We've then got LT on the end, that is your long taper. You will also find some brands do numbers for the taper as well, so it's confusing, guys. That's why I made the video. Leave a like if you can. But guys, let's move on now and talk a little bit about tattoo needles and some little tips to help you on your journey. Quality matters when it comes to tattoo needles. Brands like Cheyenne, Bishop and Quadron are all well regarded for their reliability and performance. Cheap, low quality cartridges, they might save you a bit of money up front, but a lot of them have defects and other issues, so unless you are good at spotting those, then most of the time it is worth spending that little bit extra and getting quality needles, especially when you are a beginner. So quick tip about needle diameter. Now most artists will refer to this as the gauge. The gauge is also the term used for medical needles. Now 12 gauge is like your thicker needles you would use for colour packing and like bold work mainly, you know, traditional stuff like that. But then you'll want to go down to 10 gauge or 8 gauge bug pins for more detailed work. Now, a liner with 12 gauge needles will look thicker than the same type of liner that uses 10 gauge needles, because it will cover more space. So for example, a standard 7 liner will show up thicker than a bug pin 7 liner. Now, another quick tip about bug pin tattoo needles: while 8 gauge needles are technically bug pins, most artists mean 10 gauge needles when they refer to bug pin. It's really just a term used for small needles. Nobody really knows the origin of the term, but it's widely believed to derive from the resemblance of these needles to the small, fine pins used by entomologists to pin insects and bugs for display and study. So guys, tattoo needle depth matters. So the depth of which a tattoo needle penetrates the skin is crucial. The needle typically penetrates the dermis, which is about 1 to 2 millimeters below the surface of the skin, depending on the area. But going too deep can cause excessive pain, bleeding, scarring, blowouts and everything else. But going too shallow will result in the ink not holding properly. So it might look fine when you first do the tattoo, but once it heals, some of that ink is not going to stay in because it's not put at the right depth. So that's something to look out for. Now, just a note on tattoo needle configurations: there are various types and they're each designed for a specific purpose. So for example, a round liner is used for outlines and fine details. Round shaders used for shading, colouring small areas. But you will see a lot of people line with round shaders. I do that sometimes. You will see people shade with liners as well. So it's just a tool for you to use however you see fit. Your magnums as well. These are used for shading, filling in large areas. You do have, as you know now, you've got your curved magnums, you've got your flat magnums. That's a whole other debate depending on what you think's best or what you like to use. Put it down in the comments what you like to use. Quick note on sterilization and hygiene. As you can see, the cartridges have the expiry date on there. Don't use the needle past that. And your tattoo needles will always be single use, pre-sterilized to prevent infection. That's why you've got the oxidization marking there. Now, after use, these are to be disposed of in sharps containers to maintain hygiene and prevent the spread of blood-borne pathogens. Now, reusing needles is not something you should do. It's not only unhygienic, but it's also illegal in many places as well, so don't do that. So needles are made from medical grade stainless steel, and this material is chosen because it's strong, resists rust, and it's less likely to cause an allergic reaction. Stainless steel is also durable, ensuring that the needle maintains its sharpness during the tattoo process, which is crucial for clean lines and smooth shading. Play around with it, guys. Try some different tapers, try some different diameters and see what works for you. Especially if you're a beginner, it's going to be a bit of trial and error, but make sure that you are actually keeping track of what needles you're using. Otherwise you are going to get a different effect each time, and that is not what you want. Guys, before you leave me, do check out the video on the screen now. This is 3 golden lining tips to instantly improve your tattoos. Bold claim. But guys, check that one out, and I will see you in the next one.